Mexico City, Mexico. Our first stop. It's a beautiful, beautiful spot on the Adriatic coast, waterfront, Split, Croatia, where our team of digital nomads, the Mangata, met for the first time. And it was a great place in Europe to settle in. Beautiful place. Split, Croatia actually has 300 days of sunshine. You can see the little circle around there. That was our apartment building and also our workspace. Split, Croatia was a really great place to learn that this idea of working away from work would work. And here is a picture here. One of the the main attraction in Split, Croatia is Diocletian's Castle, which is a very large structure. And one thing you'll find when you read my book is that I always looked for the deeper meaning of things, but the deeper meaning actually found me. And so I point out in chapter 1 in Split, Croatia, here we are in Diocletian's Castle. We were partying, we were getting to know each other. Diocletian's Castle has now been converted to a tourist attraction filled with souvenir shops, nightclubs, restaurants, hotels, apartments. And I point out in my memoir that I thought that this represented an incredible improvement in the human condition, because 2,000 years, not quite 2,000 years before, Diocletian, the Roman emperor, who was a dictator and a pretty bad guy, crucified a lot of Christians, and the place was built by slaves. And here we are now partying in a former Roman emperor's crib. And so these are some workplaces around the world. I was able to run my commercial real estate business by having these office places and having my laptop, and my secretary Cindy would every week send breeze blocks of paperwork through DHL, and I would tear into the paperwork, and for things that I couldn't handle electronically, of course, or by phone or by text or by email, and then I would dutifully send back the breeze blocks of paperwork via DHL back to my home office in West Palm Beach, Florida. See Diocletian's Castle, the cafes. There was even a wedding that happened inside one of the churches there in Diocletian's Castle, which, he crucified Christians back in his reign, and now they're having weddings in a Christian church. And again, I think that this represents an incredible improvement in the human condition. Just like the ability of travel for average people is now within possibility for us in our world today. Chapter 2, Czech Republic. One of the things that I thought turned out very nicely is that in the beginning of each chapter is, as you can see, is a map and then an arrow showing the city that we're in. The architecture of Prague is just spellbinding. It's incredible. It's otherworldly. It's dreamlike. It's storybook. It's Gothic. It's medieval. It's absolutely stunning and beautiful, and it's very old, and it's also very well kept. As a matter of fact, it was one of the only major cities in World War II that was not completely bombed at all. And it also wasn't rebuilt in the 1800s and 1900s like other major cities. It's a post-communist country, fairly young country, definitely on the way up. As a matter of fact, before the pandemic, I'm not sure about now, but before the pandemic, they had the lowest unemployment in all of Europe, and they're very hardworking and industrious people. They like to say that their communism really wasn't a full-blown form of communism. They were fairly far away geographically, and they like to think they never fully adapted the Soviet communist way. And so one of my proudest moments here, I sat in a panel. We were invited, 3 of us from our group, the Mangata group, were invited by the United States Embassy to hold a panel on American entrepreneurism. And the theme of the panel was overcoming business hardship through an American entrepreneur's perspective. And the lady, the cultural attaché that invited us, I wanted to have you as Americans talk about overcoming business hardship, she said, because the Czech people are not used to sticking their neck out. They're not used to taking risks. In the business context, they're used to hearing and accepting the word no. and we really feel that we're going to get some value from your story. So in the book, I talk about some of the stories that the three of us had, and as you can imagine, representing my country in that way was just absolutely proud moment, over the moon proud to represent my country in that way in the Czech Republic. We happened to be in the Czech Republic and living in the city of Prague in our second month during the celebration of what they call the Velvet Revolution, which is the independence, celebrating the independence of the country, where they threw off the yoke of communism. And one really cool thing about being in the remote year program is we had these field trips, 2, 3, sometimes 4 field trips in a month time, and we were given tours and field trips of the kind that not the average tourist would be able to have access to. And in this case, it was certainly the case. Our tour guide was a PhD student named Marcus, and he walked us through the town square, and he showed us the Velvet Revolution was actually happened on a Friday afternoon, where the college students and university students, as you can imagine, Prague is a big university town. Well, as the disgruntlement of the people toward the end of communism started to come to a head, the students from various universities organized, they decided to have a protest and a rally, and it was a Friday afternoon. And because it was a Friday afternoon, they brought their knapsacks filled with laundry because they were going home for the weekend, so that dear old mom could clean their laundry. And so they met, thousands of them met in the square, and then all of a sudden there were too many of them and they got jammed, and then the police decided to have some crowd control and started to beat them with billy clubs. And as they were beating them with billy clubs, none fatally, but as the melee, a total melee started to occur, and then the laundry got strewn all over the ground, and there was maybe even a little bit of blood. And so because of the strewn laundry everywhere and the people scattering, and the pictures started to get taken, the news media started to pick it up and sending it around the world, it actually looked like a massacre occurred. It looked like there was something much worse than what it was. And because of the way that it looked, the communists very soon after that decided to step down. They knew their number was up, and so the country had thrown off the yoke of communism and the Soviet communism, and so then they were independent and free to start a new country. So in a way, you could say that dirty laundry defeated communism in the Czech Republic. One thing that I thought turned out really nicely is that my book is filled with these segues. You see these little boxes. They're like take you out of the story, and then they give you a little info fact, if it perhaps would be a Phil fact, P-H-A-C-T-S, or no filter, P-H-I-L-T-E-R, or Phil feelings. And in Czech Republic, I have a Phil fact. No, it's a no filter. And it says that I'm pretty sure that RBF, resting bitch face, was invented in the Czech Republic. The truth is that the Czech people, smiling didn't exactly come easy to them. As a matter of fact, when we got to Lisbon, people would walk down the street and smile back at you and say hello. And that was a total contrast to the Czech people. But the truth is, once very, very, very close to the surface of their seemingly coldness, they were actually very warm and hospitable and caring and thinking and just wonderful, incredible people. And like I said, now the third month, we headed to Lisbon, Portugal, and there was just a massive gentrification underway, mainly because it happened to be at that time the most affordable and, in a way, cheapest city in all of Europe. People from the outside were the expats, influx of expats, many of whom I met from Canada, from Italy, from all over Europe, were coming in to buy by comparison, much better real estate deals than they were able to find in Europe. But at the same time, it's incredibly beautiful. Here I am at the very edge of the entire Eurasian continent. So Portugal is the westernmost country, is the westernmost piece of land in the entire Eurasian continent. And so the city is not only beautiful, but also outside the city is very beautiful. And it also has incredible weather. One of our traveling moms, we call them, the staff, two of the staffers with remote year traveled with us full time in our team. Somebody had to keep track of us, right? Somebody had to put us in our place where we needed to. And the one young lady, she's actually from Portugal, and she was very proud to be living in her country that month. And when she gave us our orientation for this city, she said, just be mindful of this what they call the Lisbon Light. And it was so true. And if you've ever been to San Diego, where they also have a lot of sunshine and very little or no rain, and around 3 or 4 or 5 o'clock in the afternoon, that certain light that just seems so buoyant and so bright and so clear, and just somehow puts you in a happy mood. And so Lisbon, like San Diego, has special weather and also a special light. It's so beautiful, it makes you wonder, why did Magellan and Columbus ever leave? It has beautiful city hills, ancient fortification, Baroque churches, former factories turned art spaces. So now we're 3 months in Europe. We're coming to a close in Lisbon, Portugal at the end of the month. And just like the other cities, just when I learned my way around the city, just when I learned how to get to the grocery store by walking, or walk to my favorite restaurants, or using Uber, or finding the yoga studio that I like, and all the Wi-Fi passwords that I'd accumulated that my smartphone and tablet and laptop would just automatically latch onto, and all the things, and learning about maybe some keys that were kind of tricky in my apartment, but then I knew how to work the keys, and all of the, all the idiosyncrasies about living in an apartment and in a city, and also the incredible connections I made with people and friends. Just when I learned all of that, and again started to feel like a resident instead of a tourist, well, it was time to move on to the next city. And not only were we moving on to the next city, we were going to a completely different part of the world. We're going to Asia. So have laptop, will travel. Here we are now in Japan. The city of Kyoto, Japan, which it was the capital of Japan for 1,000 years, and it still is the spiritual center of Japan. It's filled with temples, and as a matter of fact, the quote in the beginning of that chapter, it's from the United States Secretary of War during World War II. Under no circumstances, unless by my direct orders, will the U.S. military bomb Kyoto, Japan. Because Kyoto, Japan was the capital of Japan for 1,000 years, and is still, it happens to be the spiritual head of Japan. It's filled with temples. It's a beautiful walkable city. I walked everywhere that month, and I finally found a country where everything was done properly, actually perfectly, on time, with no drama. And one really great feature of their culture is their honesty. And you can see these pictures, these bikes. These are the bikes in my apartment building from the other tenants, and then these are bikes from department store, and bikes at the 7-Eleven. One thing that just struck me from the very beginning about these bikes, as you can see from the photos, they weren't locked. They weren't locked because no one would ever steal the bike. No one, I don't think, in Japan ever stole a bike. And that was really incredible. Just really typified their culture and how they are. And the other thing is, when we went to the restaurant, it's not a tipping culture. So twice this happened to me. They would leave a couple of yen in the change bowl. And a yen is worth about 1/10 of a cent. So if they left 3 yen as change, that's about 3/10 of a penny. And I would just leave it there and walk out of the restaurant. And twice they ran down the street in the dead of winter, giving me my 3 yen back or my 2 yen back, because in their mind, in their culture, that would be like taking advantage of somebody or actually ripping them off. And even if it is 3/10 of a penny, they wouldn't want to do that. And that's Japan, just an incredible place. One nice thing about culture is what we call a culturalization, where you take what you like from other cultures and then you bring it in as your own culture, both as an individual and as groups. You can acculturalize that way. And so one nice thing about Asia, and specifically Japan, is when you walk into a building, even a restaurant, especially like an office of some kind or a clinic. I had a cold bronchitis and I went to a clinic, and actually this was at that clinic. You take off your shoes and they give you slippers. And then they even have separate slippers for when you go to the restroom. You put on the restroom slippers and you go into the restroom. When you're done in the restroom, you leave those slippers and you put their other slippers back on. And so I really got into the habit of taking off my shoes for the rest of the remote year trip. And so bring it home, because now here in my condo in West Palm Beach, Florida, my waterfront, beautiful condo in downtown West Palm Beach, I have my shoes lined up outside, and I wear slippers inside the house. And actually now I also have slippers for my guests and my visitors, and everybody knows to take off their shoes when they come over. Have laptop, will travel. Now we're going to Chiang Mai, Thailand, the northern part of Thailand, which Thailand is called the Land of Smiles. It's a Buddhist majority country. It's a law and order monarchy. They have a strong king system there, which was something that I never really contemplated before, and nothing that I ever really lived under before. But believe me, it's really prevalent, and you feel it and you see it in everyday life. And so one of the things that I encountered was that you cannot, for example, you cannot take the money and crumple the money and throw it on the floor. That would put you in jail, because you cannot say or do anything bad against the king. And in the city of Bangkok, I was riding in one of those tuk-tuk, those three-wheelers, being driven by the driver, and a police detail pulled me over and started checking my pockets and my wallet, I guess for contraband, which of course they didn't find. But they don't have a Bill of Rights. They don't have the same kind of protections for the individuals that we do here in the United States. And it got me thinking about the idea of cultural capital versus the messy democracies of the West with all kinds of stakeholder input. We're always fighting over things and talking about our rights. And it actually made me think that why do we need the messy democracies of the West when in a country like this that works very, very well, you've got thousands and thousands of years of cultural capital, generation from generation, handed down, telling people and families and individuals and communities the best ways to behave and the best ways to act. And it was really, a political science major like myself, and I write about this, a political science major myself, and we were taught about American exceptionalism, right? And how when we started this country 250 approximate years ago, that we purposely did not want to have a monarchy, because the monarchy in our minds was and is oppressive. And here was a country that was beautiful in its surroundings, between the mountains and the islands. I went scuba diving for 5 days during my 5 weeks there, and the food was incredible and fresh, and it was a developing country. It still is a developing country, but it got me thinking that this seems to work for them, and it seems to be working really well, and maybe our way isn't the only and best way. And that's really, when you think about it, one of the interesting things about travel is it really does open your mind about other ways of doing things, right? Just outside of the city of Chiang Mai, Thailand, is a women's shelter called the Wildflower Home that takes in young mothers who had a baby out of wedlock. And what happens is, in these villages, they get kicked out of the village if they're not married. For superstitious reasons, the village elders will say that brings bad luck to the village. So they actually will kick out these pregnant, expectant mothers. And so this shelter takes them in. And so we did some volunteer work. Every month, Remote Year gave us the option to do volunteer work in the community, which I thought was a excellent component of what the travel experience meant to us and the cities that we that we resided in. And in this case, it was the wildflower home. And I was really touched with the wildflower home. As a matter of fact, after we went there, some of us went there to help with some manual labor and some construction projects that they were doing. Now, I'm not a very handy guy, but I was shoveling some gravel and moving it from one place to another, if you can actually believe that. Those of you who know me may not know me, but one thing I'm proud of is they were working on a hydroponic system that was still in development for farming, and they needed $5,000 to fully develop it. All the parts were in the downtown at the hardware store, and by the end of one of those afternoons, I'd wired the money into the account, and now they're able to do hydroponic farming. But I'm even more proud of the fact that I was able to give a sprout workshop to the young mothers there, because I noticed at lunchtime they were cooking their sprouts, they were cooking their mung bean sprouts, and as a Hippocrates Health Educator, we are taught about eating raw. No, I don't eat raw vegan all the time, but we know that when you don't cook the food, you keep the HOPE, the hope, in the food. You keep hormones, oxygen, phytonutrients, and enzymes in the food. And so they allowed me to give a sprout workshop on actually for over 2 days. And so I went into the labyrinth of the old city, behind the old city walls and these old dusty streets with these old buildings. I found a plastics superstore, which I never even heard of before. Had every kind of plastic thing that you can, a container that you can imagine, and actually found a sprouter. It's right there. And then I went further into the old town and found some places that sold mung bean sprouts, and we even sprouted almonds, and then also lentil. You can sprout lentils. And so I went back to the wildflower home and showed them how to sprout. And of course there was obviously a language difference, but all I kept saying through the interpreter was high nutrition, low cost for the children. High nutrition, low cost for the children. And then we left Chiang Mai, Thailand. We went to Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia, which we'll discuss in a moment. And weeks had gone by, and I, was very busy with what I was doing there. I almost forgot all about it. And I got this instant message from one of the organizers at the wildflower home, showing me a picture of a large bowl of sprouted mung beans. And I replied to her, as you can see here, I'm so happy about this, you have no idea. And, I've been in the commercial real estate space for 25 years. I've built shopping centers in a half a dozen states, and I've, worked hard and accomplished some things that might seem accomplished, I guess you could say. But the reason I talk about that, I mention that, is that the Sprout Workshop, and then the follow-up message that they're actually including raw sprouts into the diet of these young children, has to go down as one of the greatest accomplishments of my life. Month 6, we're almost at the halfway point. Have laptop, we'll travel. We're in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia, a 70% Muslim country. First time I ever lived in a Muslim majority country, which in this city of Kuala Lumpur, look at this incredible skyline, and look at this incredible, the iconic Petronas Towers. This city had grown in just a few short decades from 1 million people to 10 million people. And one of the things it's known for is one-party rule. There are two parties, but for 70 years, one party has ruled that country and that city. And it is known for corruption. It's also known for autocratic vision. And it was another one of those teachable moments for me where I realized, all the messiness of this stakeholder input in our fairly pluralistic system versus a few people's autocratic vision based on kickbacks and corruption. And look what you can get done. And so one of the interesting things about life and about travel is this quote, which I love. An ounce of experience is worth more than a ton of theories. So with that in mind, I want to tell you about a memorable lunch that I had. A memorable lunch with Mr. X, a man so dangerous that when I wrote the book and I checked in with some people on it, they recommended that I take out his real name and just call him Mr. X. And I had that memorable lunch with these wonderful people, my friends. I mean, in every city you can imagine, I made these really lifelong connections and friendships with people. In this case, these two wonderful vegan activists that organized some events for me that we'll talk about in a minute. And so they were in the minority in Malaysia. They weren't Malay, they weren't Chinese. That's another minority. They were the other minority besides the Chinese are the Indians. They took me to a lunch place in Little India, to a place that they call a donation restaurant. And I'd never heard of a donation restaurant either, and my guess is that you probably haven't heard of a donation restaurant either. And a donation restaurant is a restaurant where you just pay whatever you like, whatever you feel is fair. And I thought, wow, that's really interesting. So Dave, my friend here, said, well, I usually pay for 4 ringgits. Their currency is ringgits. And I like to go around the world where I've been and think of the currencies and what the exchange rate is, and it's neat to deal with different money, which in the book you'll learn I nicknamed Sparkies, which kind of caught on with the Mangata group. We just would call any currency a Sparky because sometimes, especially, you're not just in a city for a month, but you might be going on a side trip somewhere to another country in another place with a different currency, so we don't even think of what it is sometimes, we just call it a Sparky. Malaysian currency is the ringgit, and he said I usually pay 4 ringgits, which is about $1.25. And we're sitting there, about to eat our food, our wonderful vegan food, and all of a sudden Dave's mouth dropped open. I thought maybe a cockroach had dropped in his curry or something. He looked at me dead in the eyes. He said, "Don't look now, don't overreact, but this man is coming, and just be cool." And it was Mr. X. Well, Mr. X approaches our table. He was very dapper. He had a shirt and a tie. He looked like he was in his 80s. He had a crazy comb over. He was really tall, and he had black skin but he looked Aryan, so he looked like he had Indian features. And he came over to Dave and he said, in his heavy, thick accent, he said, "How do I know you? You look so familiar." "I'm Mr. X." And Dave said, "Sir, I don't know you. I'm here with my girlfriend, and we're both in law school, and I'm just, having lunch with my friend, an American." And I shook his hand. I said hello. And so after some small talking, he still couldn't remember how he knew Dave. He said, "Well, nice to meet you," and he walked back to his table. And so I learned later, as Dave explained to me, he said Mr. X was put on trial for his corruption and absconding with millions and millions of dollars for his role in a hospital project that ended up being a boondoggle. And he was put on trial, and he was not convicted, in part because the witnesses kept disappearing and turning up dead. And Dave's sister was one of the lead prosecutors in the trial. And so Dave, as a younger man, had been in the trial room many, many times just to witness history and witness the drama. And Mr. X had recognized him from the courtroom, but couldn't place him when we were at the restaurant. Well, Mr. X got off on the trial, and he was actually exiled to India. Then he was able to buy his freedom and live as a free man. So again, we can talk about corruption, we can see it on the news, reading about it in the paper, but an ounce of experience is worth more than a ton of theories. It's incredible to have these travel experiences around the world. For the month that we were in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia, I became a vegebrity, if you will, a vegan celebrity. And so Dave and some of the other vegan activists there in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia, organized 5 formal talks that I was able to give either at organized events, or they even flew me up to Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia for the Asian Pacific Vegetarian Congress, where I gave the keynote address. And it went very well. And by then I had my talk very well established in my mind. Speaking without slides is something that I only did in the United States. Because of logistics and language issues, I was able to speak without slides and talk about the 5 aspects of human health: the physical health that's benefited by a plant-based diet, the mental health, the spiritual health, the societal health. Because how in the world are we going to have a society where we treat each other well if there's violence required by our food choices? And then finally, our environmental health. So everything went really well, and there was a farewell party for the organizers and the speakers on that Sunday night. And there was so much food, there was music, they were dancing, there was a little body odor as well, but there wasn't alcohol. And that was the first time. I mean, they were dancing on the tables, they were giving speeches, they were doing karaoke, and everything was done without alcohol. And I remember thinking, wow, this is the first time since I think junior high school that I went to a social event that didn't at least have wine. And that really opened my eyes about other cultures and how really the Indian people and the Malaysian people, I mean, they basically don't drink alcohol. And I thought that was really refreshing and teachable for me. So after that farewell party, I was heading back to my home, air quotes home, right, in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia. Whenever I went on a side trip and then came back to where we were living that month, it always felt like going home. So I was in the airplane, relaxed in my seat, ready to take off. We're on the jetway, and nothing prepared me for what happened next. All of a sudden, there was an explosion. I thought maybe our engine had exploded. And for several moments, nobody knew what was going on or what happened or where it came from. And then I saw the stewardess lurch forward and point out to the window. She said, "There's been a crash." Then I went up and looked out of the window. And sure enough, there was a crash. And this picture that I took was taken actually hours after the initial crash, because I was so numb to what had happened. I couldn't believe what I was seeing, and nothing really made sense. But as it turned out, a commuter aircraft, a twin prop aircraft, had come in the wrong way. Against the orders, the direction of air traffic control, they came in the other side. And on that other side was a fence that was at a certain location where it clipped their wheels. And they crashed into the ground, and 38 people out of the 70 passengers, 38 souls, perished that day, basically right in front of us. And I talk about the carnage that I saw in the book, and I think about it all the time. So I called I think there was half a bar to 1 bar of cell phone service on the airplane, and I called my mom because I didn't want her to see it on the news and worry about me. Said, "Mom," and it was early. It was like 8 or 9 at night, but for them in America, it was about 8 a.m. My mom answers the phone. I think she was just getting up. I said, "Mom," and she put me on speaker. "Mom, I'm okay, but there's been a plane crash here on the runway, and I'm fine. It wasn't our plane, and I don't know when we're going to get to take off, but this is the situation." So then right away she goes, "Phil, you need to come home now. You need to stop this travel thing. You've traveled enough now. You've proved that you can live away from where you live, and it's time that you just come home. This is enough is enough." And my dad said a version of the same thing. I tried to calm them down and assure them that I was okay, which I was okay, thank God. And I called my sister. I said, Jeannie, I'm okay, but there's been a plane crash and this is what's happened. And she said, "Phil, you need to come home now. This travel thing's gone on too long. Enough is enough. You need to come home." So ironically, I ended up being the one consoling them instead of the other way around. But the lesson I learned from experiencing something like that, where 38 souls had just been snuffed out of existence, at least on this earth, and their families and all of that, I just can't even imagine. I think about that, and the lesson that I have about it is, then and now I will tell you, I just want to be worthy of a life well lived. I want to continue to be worthy of a life well lived. And that life is fragile, and it can be taken away anytime. But at the same time, it's most probably going to play out that our life is going to be the result of decades and decades and decades of choices. So let's try to make the right choices so that we can live a long and full and fruitful life. At least that's how I see it. We've just passed the 6-month mark, and now we're going to travel through the next 6 months in South America and North America. And now we're 2 months in the country of Argentina, where we spent the first month in Buenos Aires and the second month in Cordoba, Argentina. And Argentina's got serious problems. They've got existential economic problems, essentially from socialism. And the main symptom of the problem of the economic problem is runaway inflation. As a matter of fact, in the 60 days, the 2 months that we were in Buenos Aires and Cordoba, Argentina, there was 24% inflation. So from walking to the workspace, from the apartment to the workspace, I would walk past the tiendas and the mercados and see that the price of apples from one day to the next had changed. It was so bad that was the reason why these electrical union workers ran past me one day as I was leaving lunch, going back to the workspace, ran past me one day on their way to protest their paychecks at the electric company headquarters, and they decided to light this bonfire. Right in front of me, I could actually feel the heat coming through. I thought to myself, wow, that's something you don't live through every day. Just outside of Buenos Aires, again, another give back project that we had one weekend, where we constructed hot water heaters made from essentially plastic Coke bottles and beer cans. And so how do you build a hot water heater from Coke bottles and beer cans? Well, I'll tell you how you do it. First thing you do, because this is what we did, we actually built one. First thing you do is you take a beer can and you crush it. And then you paint the beer can black with black paint. And then you take that flattened beer can painted black and you stick it on what looks like a wood paint stirrer, and you wrap it, and then it dries, the glue dries, and then you stick that inside a 1 liter Coke bottle that you cut in half, or Pepsi. We're doing Pepsi. We're not doing the woke-topian capitalism that Coke is doing now. We're switching to Pepsi now, right? So you take the 1 liter Pepsi bottle, you stick that in the 1 liter Pepsi bottle that you cut in half, and then you take the flattened beer can with the 1 liter Pepsi bottle and you stick that in a 2 liter plastic Pepsi bottle, and then you string them together and then you wrap them in saran wrap, and then you put it all together to create a larger cell with PVC piping. And then you run the water through the one end, and then you put it on the roof, and then the sun heats the water. And this was no experimental design. This was actually a workhorse design that had been tried and true, that was organized by the company, by the volunteer company, the charitable organization that helped organize this effort for us. They were doing this, every day and every weekend with different people. And so I'm from Lancaster, Pennsylvania, where we're home to the Amish people, where they can build a barn in 3 days for their neighbor and do what they call a barn raising. And just like I'd witnessed a barn raising in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, after we finished putting all the cells together and creating one solar panel water heater, we put it on the roof and we stuck the water through it, the one end, and I saw it course through, and then the water shot out the other end without any leaking, and it worked perfectly. And just like the Sprout Workshop and some of the presentations and lectures that I give in around the world, helping this one family out that finally had hot water in their home and hot showers and hot water to wash dishes, this, like the other activities, has to be one of the greatest accomplishments of my life. Argentina and I didn't get along the whole time, Because coming from Asia, where everything basically was done perfectly, without confrontation, without raising voice, without raised voices, well, all of that went out the window with Argentina. That didn't exactly govern how they acted. And that was a little bit of a shock for me. And I missed Asia because of that reason. Well, Argentina has what I call the kissing culture. And this actually clinched the deal for me, because Argentina and I didn't get along the whole time. But this kissing culture, and what do I mean by that? Well, I noticed it if I was at the grocery store and there was a change of shift and the new people were coming in to relieve their colleagues from the previous shift. What did they do? Or they're just coming into work and joining their colleagues. The first half an hour, maybe it seemed like an hour, because by the way, there were really long lines. You'd take you a whole afternoon to go grocery shopping, go to an ATM, because both had incredibly long lines. And I write about that in the book as to why there were long lines at the ATM. It has to do with the economic basket case that they had become. But besides that, they would go around in their place of work. They're going around kissing each other, hello, greeting each other. Even at the workspace, they would go around kissing each other. At an office, at a travel agency, at the tailor, wherever you were, the Argentinians are just kissing each other. And so even though Argentina and I didn't get along the whole time, the Argentinian people, they kissed their way into my heart. In month 7 in Cordoba, I actually broke my foot, the fourth metatarsal bone, just from walking around so much. I estimated that I walked about 5 miles a day in every city that I lived in. And this young man was my therapist, who put the ultrasound and then the magnetic treatment. And even the first treatment, on the goodbye, he kissed me goodbye on the right cheek, always on the right cheek. And then when I was going there several days a week, when he greeted me, he kissed me, and then when we said goodbye, he kissed me. And that's just the way the culture is, and the truth is that they totally won me over by their affection, and it's not a fake thing. It's just a real joy that comes from their hearts and travels up and to their lips. It's wonderful. Lima, Peru, also wonderful people. It's an enchanting place. It's on the west coast. It's on the west coast of the continent, so the city is directly on the Pacific Ocean, and they're wonderful people. They're a mix of the Europeans and the Western Hemisphere Indians, and so when you get outside the city of Lima, they're all about this tall, like this lady, and they dress in bright colors, and they're wonderful people. In that month number 9, chapter 9, I participated in a sacred plant ceremony, an ayahuasca ceremony. And you may have heard of it, you may not have heard of it, but you drink a sacred medicine with other people at night. You sit in a hut like that, and you go in a trance, it's a very strong trance. And I write extensively about the beautiful experience that I had at the ayahuasca ceremony. Following the ayahuasca ceremony, I started to feel positive again. You'll notice that in the book, chapters 6 and 7, coming from Asia, I started to, and all of us in the Mangata team, many of us started to feel like the bloom was off the rose with the excitement of traveling around the world. We were starting to get tired. We were starting to get injured, including myself with a broken foot. Some people lost their jobs. Some people missed their girlfriends and decided to stop the travel and go back home. But after the ayahuasca ceremony, I started to feel positive again. And if you do it for the right reasons, I promise you that the sacred plant medicine ceremony, ayahuasca ceremony, would be a very, very positive experience for you. It has actually the opposite of what the medical industrial complex will offer with their chemical drugs. This is not a drug, this is plant medicine. And again, it was very, very positive for me and helped me actually propel me into the last segments of this incredible voyage of self-discovery this magic carpet ride that I was on, this modern day odyssey that I write about in my memoir. Have laptop, will travel. Now we're going to spend 2 months in the country of Colombia, both Medellin and Bogota. And Bogota is the capital of the city. It's a sophisticated, first world city. It happens to be at 82 or 8,100 feet above sea level. And because of that, and I'd never considered this before, that your height above sea level determines your weather. It makes sense, of course, but once you experience it, you actually get it. And so their weather, it's constantly winterish, definitely fall and wintry there, because it sits so high up. And the other thing is that, and I had trouble with it, is I had headaches, I had altitude sickness for at least the first week, and also shortness of breath. And you see it in everyday people when they climb stairs. They're out of breath just like you're out of breath, and they live there. And so it's actually a challenging environment. I found it very challenging. But then Medellin is known as the city of eternal spring, because Medellin is at 5,000 feet above sea level. And I learned by living there for a month that at 5,000 feet above sea level, the weather's perfect. Every day is like spring. And we know this from airline travel because airline cabins are pressurized at 8,000 feet. That any time, any altitude below 6,000, you don't have breathing issues and you don't have sickness issues. One of the reasons why people get sick on airplanes is because of the height that you're at with the pressurization of the cabin. And so that creates challenges. Medellin, I call it the Medellin Miracle, because I had gone into Colombia thinking that this was the land of narcos, this was the land of drug dealers, and this was the land of kidnapping, which actually my family had been concerned about kidnapping actually throughout South America, and I decided to keep a lower profile with my vegan speaking presentations, although I did have a presentation and a gathering in Medellin. I felt so comfortable. None of that was true, is what I'm saying, because I felt so comfortable. I ended up having a workshop and inviting about 30 people came, and I write about that in the memoir. The Pablo Escobar tour was given by this nice young man who I became friendly with because he also owned a coffee shop. He also owned a car dealership. He grew the coffee and he sold and exported coffee. But he actually grew up with Pablo Escobar's son. They went to the same school, and he was on the same soccer team as Pablo Escobar's son, and they would play soccer, and the bodyguards would travel with them when they played the different teams, and their team always won because no one ever went near Pablo Escobar's son, so they always gave him the ball, and then he was able to score a goal because no one was going to challenge Pablo Escobar's son. But he had the unfortunate experience of he was actually kidnapped decades before, and he was pistol whipped. They broke his nose, and his family actually had a little bit of enough money. They're upper middle class, if not wealthy, and they paid the ransom. And he hated his country, Colombia, so much that he moved to Europe, where he wanted to relocate. And some years went by, and his mother urged him to come back. She said, things have changed, things are different. And so he came back. And when he came back, he got into the coffee growing business, became an entrepreneur. He opened up this incredible coffee shop, which I can attest. Every morning I went for this incredible coffee, had the best coffee, got into the car business. And so he was now thriving as an entrepreneur, and I saw this a lot with the other Colombians that I met. He stood in our tour. He stood, and that's actually right there. That's the roof where Pablo Escobar was shot dead. And he stood while he was giving the tour. He said that Colombia is now become the country that he always knew that it could be. And right there at that moment, knowing him, getting to know him over that month, making that connection with him and his family and his partners at the coffee shop, at that moment I was sold on Colombia. The other thing that really sold me on Colombia, so to speak, sold, whatever, is their national pride through their soccer teams. Never before. I mean, I'm from the Philadelphia area. I love the Philadelphia Eagles. You know, down here in the Florida area, someone might love Miami. That's all great. But imagine an entire country coming together for one team. And we were there in South America, Peru and Colombia for sure, during the World Cup. And in each of those two countries, the national pride and the fervor of enthusiasm was just something that I don't think I've ever seen before. Maybe a little bit, we saw it in the Olympics back maybe in 1980 when our hockey team beat the Russians. But that was just one moment. This is just an entire ethos, an entire country swell of enthusiasm and pride for their country. This is Pablo Escobar's house that was called Monaco, the Monaco house. And they found torture equipment in the basement when they arrested him and when the house became abandoned. And then the living quarters was upstairs where I guess he would help his children with homework after he tortured his subjects. And now, since then, they've knocked that house down and it is now a public park. Finally, month 12, have laptop, will travel, where we've been through 4 continents, we've been to 10 countries. This is our 12th city, Ciudad de Mexico, Mexico City, Mexico, a population of 20 million people. The city is actually built on a lake, and because it grew, they filled it in with clay as it grew and grew and grew over the lake. Because of that, and also 2 tectonic plates that are shifting, they have actually 20 earthquakes a day. And the city team told us, they actually gave us a tutorial on earthquake safety. And when you walk into buildings, they have these signs, like we might have fire exits, they have earthquake, stations. And I never lived in a place where the specter was, the specter was earthquakes. Here in Florida where I live, we have hurricanes, and there they've got the constant specter and actually have had very real and deadly earthquakes. And this city of 20 million people, so close to the United States at this point, I felt like I could smell the air from the USA blowing over. By then, even though I loved this travel thrill, was just incredible. I loved it. I was worried if I was going to be bored if I got home, but at the same time, I was tired. We were all tired. We all wanted to get home and somewhat back to normal life. And so in this month, and some of us, as you can imagine, had really grown together as family, as brothers, as sisters, and some of us couldn't stand each other. And that's just life, right? This is just a microcosm for life. And those of us who were close, and actually I loved everybody, and I think everybody loved each other too. But like natural as humans, we're going to be, feel closer to others. And those of us who were palling around together really every day, we just kept saying to ourselves, we're having this lunch, let's just savor this lunch. Let's savor this glass of wine. Let's savor this weather, this whole experience, because this is never going to happen again. This is never going to be like this again. And so the teachable moment that I had, several teachable moments that I had in Ciudad de Mexico, Mexico City, was be in the moment. As much as it sounds like a cliche, being in the moment, because what happens is many of us, and I'm guilty of this as well, is we're actually never living in the present. We're always upset about something that happened in the past very often, or we're anxious about something that may or may not happen in the future. And the result of that is some of us live our entire life and we're not even there. And so this last month, this adjournment month for the Mangata team was a month where we really, whether we were at the Lucha Libre, the wrestling matches, or whether I was in a street market, of which there were numerous, wherever I was, I actually, to this day, am able to train myself to be in a moment so I can actually experience this incredible life in this incredible time that we all find ourselves living in this point in history. I celebrated my birthday, and I took some of the guys out on my birthday. Luce Libre, that Atlantis is his name. Talk a lot about Luce Libre in the book and what Luce Libre wrestling means to the people, and if I could sum it up in one word, it's all about the struggle. Luce Libre resonates with everyday people because it's a struggle. In the ring is a struggle, and life is a struggle, and that's why people identify with it, and why in many ways it's so popular. The last weekend, our farewell weekend, we went glamping. We went to an area outside of the city and went glamping, which stands for glamorous camping. So we had air-conditioned tents, and our sleeping bags weren't on the floor; they were on these beds. So it wasn't roughing it, but we got a chance to be with each other for the last time. And one thing I'd forgotten all about it was this postcard. The first week, all the way back in Split, Croatia, we wrote postcards to ourselves that we would get on the last weekend here on the farewell weekend outside of the city. And I wrote to myself back in Split, Phil, how are you? What did you accomplish? What place do you want to return? How is the vegan food? Your favorite place? Who is your new family? So now what? LOL. P.S. Habla español. I did study Spanish for 6 months. I'm not particularly good at languages. Having grown up Greek and went to Greek school as a kid for 6 years, the truth is if you don't use the language, if you leave the language will leave you. And unfortunately, I started to actually speak Spanish to Uber drivers, to the people at the grocery store, and just around, with just a basic conversation, and just a beautiful, beautiful language that it just seems, the way I describe it, it just seems so easy on the ears. And it's very logical, it makes sense, and the words to me are just romantic. It just sounds romantic. So we're back in our apartments in Mexico City, and it was the very last night. And my other two roommates, Alvin and Tommy, who you will learn about and get to love or maybe hate in the book, both had left the apartment, had gone back to their normal lives back in the United States. And actually I was there by myself on the very last night, and I was packing, but my version of packing had really changed over the 12 months. Packing for me now meant just take everything, don't fold it, just throw it into just a big ball into the luggage, try to step on the luggage, and if it zips up, great, and then moving on. So I was doing that version of packing, thinking about things, and all I could think of was, I did it. I did it. 12 cities, 12 months, 10 countries lived in, 16 countries total visited, including the 10, 24 vegan presentations, 49 strangers who became family, countless connections and experiences around the world. So what does it all mean? Well, cultures are diverse despite globalization. When you think about it, we live in the culture and the culture lives in us. We are sovereign as individuals. We have human agency. We can exercise our individuality. That's on the one side. But on the other side, we have culture, and there's a natural tension between the culture and the individual. And so we live in the culture, and the culture lives in us. But besides all that, everywhere I go, everywhere I went, the people are nice. And so I learned that it's not about the journey, but it's about the destination. It wasn't all fun and games. There were broken bones, broken cell phones, broken promises. There were highs, there were lows. It will probably take me an entire lifetime to process my remote year abroad. And so this lady, pictured here, at the time, a few years ago, she's not alive anymore, she was the world's oldest person. She was 116 years old. You could see her birthday cake has 117. You always put one to grow on, right? And so they asked her, what's it like to be the world's oldest person? She said, it goes by really fast. So whether we're here on this earth for our genetic potential, which is 12 decades, about 120 years old, or a few decades, say 4 decades, 40 years, we're really here for a short period of time. So the whole point of my memoir is not to say, hey, look at me, look at this guy doing all this cool stuff. The point of my memoir and my hope and my dream is to inspire others, to inspire you on your life's journey, and actually to live a CAPE, a CAPE life, celebratory, adventurous, purposeful, and extraordinary. It's my hope and my dream that you can make yours a CAPE life. Celebratory, adventurous, purposeful, and extraordinary. So in closing, I have a question for you. Do you have a laptop? Now you go travel. Thank you so much for watching today.